Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
On March 18, 2023, I was awoken in the middle of the night at about 3 or 4 a.m. The room was still dark, but there was a slight glow to the room. I was half conscious and gradually regained more awareness with my eyes fully opened. My body was completely paralyzed, but I was fighting and screaming at the entities in the room. I used every strength I had to fight them, reaching my hands out and screaming what I thought was aloud but was telepathic. My body lost all functioning and I couldn't even open my mouth to scream, but I did mentally as loud as I possibly could. I knew they heard every word I screamed at them. I fought them with all the energy I could. I told them they have no authority to touch me or take anything from me. That I had my free will and they were not permitted to do anything to me. I felt them put more energetic force on me and I began to get more and more tired, unable to stop them, and felt I couldn't fight them any longer and just give up. I heard in my mind to just give up, that I could not fight them. I felt like they were taking my baby from me. I had not had my period in 2.5 months and I felt I was pregnant but was not completely sure because of my age, 45. I felt it could be premenopausal symptoms as well. I eventually tired and felt myself sinking deeper into unconsciousness. I saw more than one being in the room. There was one very tall figure, about 6 or 7 feet tall. It was wearing a robe-like gown and it had 2 distinct protrusions on its large skull and forehead. It seems to have authority over the matter. There were more beings in the room, smaller than the larger one. Not sure how many, but I feel there were at least 2 more. I remember I really hated the taller one, as it seemed to have no care for what it was doing to me and what could have possibly been a small embryo of mine. I don't know if they impregnated me or if I was pregnant with my partner and they took the small fetus from us. I don't know if I was even pregnant for sure. It was just a feeling and I was screaming out to them in the middle of the night. I very quickly fell deep asleep. The next day I felt it was a horrible nightmare, that my eyes were fully open to see what I saw. But I knew very well this was a familiar feeling to me, as in 1994 I had another similar experience with 2 small grays in the middle of the night when they temporarily paralyzed me and shoved something up my nose. At that time I thought it might have been a terrifying nightmare. But over the years I was shown footage of abduction accounts and realized they were very similar to my own experience, and began to realize that those experiences were as real as they felt. A couple days after this incident took place, I had the intuition to check my body to see if there was any visible evidence from my experience. So just before I had a shower, I had a look around my body, and then I noticed an indentation on my mid-back right side just along my spine. It felt like a hole in my back with a layer of skin on top. It was something very unusual and an unlikely thing to find on your back. I feel some discomfort from it and it feels like a wound, as though it is in the process of healing. It's like a piece of tissue beside my spine has been taken. I feel a metallic feel around it and it's slightly sensitive when I move or twist my back. I felt a lot of anger from this experience because I did not agree or give my permission to do whatever it is they are doing. I had to learn to just let it go and not allow fear or anger to overtake me. I do feel some fear of going to bed now and have noticed I am going to bed a lot later, staying up until 2 a.m. My partner is away a lot, so I am sleeping alone most nights. I wonder if he had been there sleeping beside me, if these beings would have come. I'm trying to have positive thoughts that maybe whatever these beings are doing to experiment with our DNA or embryos is for some greater good. I really hope so anyways. This last experience was not at all good, and I wonder if they truly were extraterrestrials or the government posing as extraterrestrials. I'd love to go under hypnosis to know the truth, and for a doctor or specialist who is familiar with these types of extractions from the body to have a look at the indentation on my back.
While I was in the Marine Corps stationed in Okinawa, Japan in 1995, I was at a shooting range near Camp Schwab guarding ammunition, sometime in August. I had just done a radio check at about 9:05 p.m. with range control to let them know everything was okay. I pulled my poncho up over my whole body because of the bugs attacking me. The next thing I know, my poncho is pulled off of me and I see what would be called a typical, gray-looking alien, except that its skin was more of an almond color. It was a very bright night with a full moon, standing over me with what looked like 4 others behind him. What shocked me, even more, was that it talked to me, but it sounded like one of those adult characters on the Peanuts cartoons, like Wha Wha Wha. I remember just becoming unhinged, jumping up, and starting screaming when it talked to me, and then it just disappeared along with the others. The other guy guarding ammo with me woke up when he heard me scream and asked what was wrong. I told him what had just happened and he looked at me like I was crazy. I then noticed that it was 10:45 p.m., and I was like, what the heck? I know that I did not fall asleep because it was my turn on the radio watch. I know that I did not dream this, but cannot account for the missing time. I did not want to radio in what just happened for fear of getting a psych evaluation, even though an intruder near an ammunition dump is serious and should have been called in. The other Marine with me said that he was asleep the whole time and did not see or hear anything until I started screaming and jumping around. I kept quiet about this incident for a few days, but it was bothering me so much that finally about a week later I told a couple of my friends about it. A good friend of mine that had been out there a day before said that almost the same thing happened to him, except that he had chased it into the ammo tent, and when he was just about to shoot it, it just disappeared. He said that he was also afraid to say anything because he thought that people would think that he was crazy. I never saw any bright lights or alien spacecraft, just the aliens.
I do not remember what happened prior. All I remember was waking up mid-abduction. Imagine that you wake up from sleeping after a night of drinking, you don't remember where you were before, you just see where you are now. That's exactly how it happened. I woke up standing in my own hallway in my trailer home. I was overwhelmed with the emotion of fear, but I did not know why or what was happening. My body was mostly paralyzed and frozen in place while I was standing. I looked at my feet and then my hands, and I noticed that my hands were on the side of a door in my hallway, with my fingers clutched to the side of the door, as if I was being pulled from behind. I turned my head around slowly, and I saw this being who was my height, maybe just a few inches taller than me. I was 10 years old at the time. He had a huge head that looked like a praying mantis's head. He had 2 humongous eyes. I couldn't see a mouth or nose or anything like that I remember. It didn't have ears. Just a huge white head and huge eyes. It was wearing a black cloak, not tight-fitting. And it had his hands outstretched like it was trying to grab me. It had 3 fingers on each hand, possibly 4, but definitely not 5. The fingers seemed weird and it moved very little. As soon as I locked eyes with this being, it felt like someone punched me. As soon as my eyes locked with it, I became more paralyzed and I began to forget what was happening. I looked away as fast as I could and then never looked back for about an hour. After I turned my back to it, it was standing in between me and my room. I was standing between it and the kitchen. We were both standing in a very narrow hallway in my trailer home. My fingers were clutched against the railing of a door that we called the middle room of our home. I could feel myself being pulled back by what felt like a strong magnetic force. Like being pushed back by wind. I could fight it. It wasn't a lost cause. I could struggle. As soon as I stopped looking at the being, my memory slowly started to come back. I thought, where am I? And why am I here? I was full of fear and I looked down at my feet. I could tell that I was trying to run away from this thing. Looking into its eyes was so mesmerizing that it made me forget if it was a good guy or a bad guy. It felt indescribable. Later on in my life I would go on to try LSD, and the very peak of that experience is the best analogous experience I can use to describe what it felt like. I forgot if it was a good or bad guy. And then I began hearing thoughts in my head saying, "Come this way." I considered going to the being. I didn't know if I was running away from it or if I was running to it. That's how quick and intense I forgot everything in that second. I looked at my legs though and could tell that I was trying to run away. I could feel my body filled with overwhelming fear. And then it slowly occurred to me, if I'm afraid and running away, this must be bad. This must be a bad person. And then I had this overwhelming gut-wrenching feeling that this was not the first time I saw this thing. I had a feeling that I had seen this being several times before in trips that it made me forget. It was weird. A catch-22 philosophical experiment. I felt like I had agreed to this experiment. It was weird. Like, we had had this discussion before. That it could talk to me and I could go on trips with him, but only if I agreed to have my memory wiped every time. But these were not good experiences. I was so filled with terror that I knew this had to be bad. I thought maybe it was a dream. I tried so hard to wake up. I desperately wanted to wake up. It was at that moment that I realized that I had fallen asleep inside of the middle room and not my bedroom that day. I thought, maybe if I can pull myself back into the middle room, I can find my body lying there and I can jump back into my body and kind of like, wake up. I struggled for more than 30 minutes. My fingers were aching and my legs were hurting. It did not feel like sand and I did not have weakness. I had my full strength and was struggling the entire time there. I was slowly finally able to pull myself maybe 6 inches closer and was able to pull my body into the door frame. To my shock, my body was not lying there. I desperately wanted to wake up. I tried so hard to wake up. I kept pulling myself forward down the hallway and grabbed the side of my kitchen's refrigerator. It is at the end of the hallway going into the kitchen. I grabbed it desperately and kept pulling forward. After a short while I became overwhelmed with fear. I began screaming at the thing behind me. I didn't look at its eyes. But I screamed at it. I begged it. I pleaded and cried and screamed and begged for my life. I was a slobbering mess and begged it to please stop torturing me. My fear and pain slowly turned to anger. I began disparaging the being. I said, "Why are you doing this to me?" I demanded that it leave me alone. I said things like, "What gives you the right to do this to people?" I asked if it thought I was some kind of animal or that I didn't have emotions and free will. Those are not all the exact words. I spoke in a combination of screamed words and thoughts. But it was mostly thoughts that were experienced. It only spoke back to me in thoughts. As I waited there, he stood emotionless and didn't say anything for a very long time. I didn't know if it was trying to save me or if it was trying to hurt me. I still don't. After maybe an hour more of struggling, I pulled myself into the kitchen and could see the front door wide open in front of me. I don't remember if I saw people outside or not. I can't remember exactly anything beyond this. It was at that moment that I surrendered my body. I gave up. And I hoped to not remember any pain. The next thing I know, I woke up in the bed in the middle room. I remember waking up first, and then only after several seconds passed did I open my eyes. I pretended that I didn't remember anything. I walked slowly out of the room and said out loud, "What a weird dream." I went to the windows and looked outside and couldn't find anyone or anything nearby. I stared at the sun coming through the blinds for a long time and could almost feel the being still in the hallway there. I slowly went back to bed and pretend nothing happened. When I woke up again, I just kept on like nothing happened.
I had the most frightening encounter while fishing on a lake in northern Minnesota in a rowboat. Late one night I saw something appear above the tree line at the end of the bay. It was cold and it had a weird shape. Then it dropped down above the water and flew directly over my head at UFO speed and stopped. Not knowing what it was, I just glanced up and saw a pure evil mass hovering above my head. I got a feeling of dread as soon as I made eye contact and thought my life was over. Several things went through my mind. That second I thought maybe I was about to be abducted even though I'd never heard of UFOs looking like a black cloud. It hovered for about 20 seconds and then flew off exactly the same way it flew out. This was also seen by a friend from shore having a smoke out on his dock, looking for me. As soon as it left, I frantically paddled my way back to shore, looking back thinking that it could return. Words can't explain the level of terror that I had that night. It was pure evil and still haunts me to this day. Just not knowing what it was still bothers me because what I saw that night doesn't exist in our world, but it was real. My friend and I sat at the kitchen table asking each other what that was. Nothing comes to mind. That's what's so troubling. This changed my life forever. I never go outdoors at night by myself anymore, worrying that it might return. After that night, I went through some of the hardest times of my life. Strings of bad luck. I ended up getting fired at work and lost my house and also had heart issues and nearly lost my life. This all happened after that night. It was like an attachment. I still look up to the sky whenever I'm out at night fearing it might return. All I know is that whatever it was, it had to have come from a different dimension because what I saw that night just doesn't exist in our world. I'd only glanced at it for a few seconds, but that was enough to know it was pure evil. It was about 20 feet by maybe 15 feet wide. I had my 2 dogs with me that night and they were so scared they were trying to hide under my legs. When this happened, they were so scared they jumped out of the boats when we got close to shore. So I landed in my muck up to my knees and couldn't get to shore fast enough. When I ran up to the cabin, the door was locked, so I pounded on the door until he opened it. Not knowing my friend had seen it from the dock, I came in with mud up to my knees and he didn't even notice. That's when I noticed his hands were trembling from fear, so I asked him what was wrong, before even telling him of my encounter. He told me what he saw from the dock was exactly what I had seen hovering over my head. We spent the rest of the night drinking at the table trying to make sense of what had happened but couldn't come up with explanation. Since that night he won't ever spend any time at his cabin anymore and you couldn't pay me enough money to ever return.
I lived in Ventnor, New Jersey up until 2 nights ago. For the past 5 months, something unexplained has been happening in Ventnor, Margate, and Atlantic City, New Jersey. As crazy as this sounds, I believe my son and I have been abducted by aliens. My son's memory was wiped. On Thursday night, he came into my room saying he couldn't breathe. He looked scared and he's never looked like that. On the following Friday, he was spacey and looked off. Kept pulling on his ear because that's how they tell you to listen to them. I couldn't understand what was going on with him. He was missing things he should know that whole week. I just felt something was way off. Then I took my son to the hospital on December 14th, 2022 because he came home talking about space missions, Atlantis, the lost city, and voices in his head. It told him to break my mom's crystal glass. I tell my son I love him just about every half hour and we just have a strong bond. He asked me during that off week why I say I love him. He's 8 years old and never asked me that. He knows why I love him so much and never questioned my love for him. My son started hitting himself, saying they had control over his body. In the hospital, I sang him a song that he made up for me as a toddler and the doctor saw him starting to bang his head on the metal bar of the bed. They wanted me to move out of the area because we figured out what they were doing. It's just not us. I did research and then looked at my pictures and it explains all of this. So I took my son and me to a shelter and they still have not left him. My son told me that his school friends are no longer the same. His best friend didn't even know his mother's name. I can understand kids changing, but this was in one day. My son told me he was abducted and I believe I was as well. We have weird dreams and we both remember the night we were taken. I woke up in a puddle of water. I couldn't understand why. My mom doesn't understand any of this and she became mean and she's normally not like that. She kicked us out after telling us she would never do that. She told me to go live with my father who she knows I have not spoken to for 5 months, and before that 3 years. They keep showing him an image of a gun in his head. They told me they are doing an experiment in Ventnor, Margate, and Atlantic City. I have friends who live in Atlantic City. There are people jumping off buildings at an alarming rate. Hotels and homes. I understand the holiday season's depression, but it's truly not that. My son came home and told me that his friends on the bus are very different as well and people in school are forgetting things. My son didn't know who my sister was. She died 2 years ago. I keep a collage of her in my room. He told me he had no idea who she was. He saw the pictures and had no clue where they were taken. They keep dangling carrots for you to trust them and to make people believe they will help you, but they don't. They make your life a living hell. I'm done not talking about it. It's been far too long and these 3 towns need help. I have many pictures to show. I used to go take pictures of the sunsets and took some great pictures, then I started noticing aliens in the pictures. Then all this weird stuff happened. I couldn't explain it. I wasn't even myself. I started feeling better when we left the area, but my son is still being threatened. They told him in 1 year all his friends would be kidnapped and taken to another planet. They told him that on December 14th, 2022. My child is my whole life and with everything going on I wasn't taking any chances. We left and went to a homeless shelter. I'm a great mother. I took extreme life-saving measures because he's scared and frankly so am I.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.